It's great to be back at an Outlook conference, which importantly is about the future of agriculture, fisheries and forestry. One of the key planks of the Australian economy, one of the elements of the Australian economy that kept us out of recession during that difficult time in the late noughties. Today I'm going to focus on the areas of the portfolio where I have specific responsibilities, and that's in forestry, fisheries and in horticulture. All three areas that are very important in my home state, but also in regional communities around the country, but all areas where the future is important. The lessons of the past are also important to be learned from, and in the context of the ambition of generating growth in agriculture towards 2050, also play an extremely important role. I'll start with forestry. Forestry is an area that has been contested for a long period of time in this country. It's been used as a political tool and weapon, but it is one which, in my view, is now emerging to be an important sector for particularly regional economies, but one that will play a significant role in the development of our built environment. I started saying when we came to government back in 2013 that timber was the building material of the 21st century. And as the few years have rolled on since then, we are actually starting to see that come to fruition. The development of CLT technology in the building industry, where companies like Lend-Lease will be using up to 30% of CLT as a technology for up to 30% of their commercial residential construction, is driving significant demand for timber and timber-based products in the economy. Not only that, we're seeing a number of other products that are developing as well. Timber-based derivatives. When I launched the government's forest plan back in September, that event coincided with the first distillation of a product called styrene, which is a precursor chemical for a number of things, but based on timber at a plant in southern Tasmania. In fact, as I used the word styrene, a text came through from the plant saying we've just completed our first distillation. And that's a significant event, because what it demonstrates is that not only are we seeing the traditional demands for timber and timber-based products, but we are and going to continue to see demand for additional products. And the World Bank indicated back in 2016 that the global demand for timber and timber-based products would quadruple by 2050. And when you consider the life cycles that are involved with the growth of timber and timber-based products being at minimum 15 years, we need to be thinking in those life cycles for the production of that material. And if you're considering perhaps a radiata pine product that might have a 25 to 35 year life cycle to grow to maturity, you can understand why we've set ourselves the target of growing 1 billion new trees in the next decade. Because if we start putting those trees in the ground now with a 35-year growth cycle, we're talking 2053, 2054 before they're available. And so to meet those demands is significant. Concerningly, when we released the State of the Forest report recently, what we saw was a decline, particularly in the plantation sector, over the last 5 or 6 years. And that's a real concern when you consider the growth that's going to be demanded. On a national scale, we've got the 7th largest reported forest area of any country with 134 million hectares of forest, covering about 17% of our landmass in Australia. It's about 3% of the world's forests. We've got 132 million hectares of native forest and about 2 million hectares of commercial plantations. But as I said, that plantation estate declined by about 44,000 hectares over the cycle of the last State of the Forest report. And if we're going to meet the demand that's projected, we need to increase that. So the billion trees that we've projected to put in the ground over the next decade is going to be absolutely vital, and that equates to something like 400,000 hectares. Now, to do that, we're going to have to make some changes to our current settings. We're going to have to work significantly with the agricultural sector, because there is, in my mind, significant opportunity for the inclusion of trees back into the agricultural landscape, which can be done without any loss in agricultural productivity, providing farmers with an additional revenue stream through sequestration of carbon, through obviously the opportunity to grow timber, and to do some landscape repair, so landscape services. And I've seen examples where up to 20% of a farm has been regenerated with native forest, with zero reduction in agricultural productivity, but also importantly a reduction in evaporation rates. So there are a range of things that can be that can come as a benefit from putting trees back into the landscape, and we need to work very closely with the agricultural sector, and pleasingly the National Farmers Federation have been partners with us in the development of the plan, but will need to be partners with us as that plan is implemented. Over recent weeks, we've announced the location of 4 initial trial forest hubs around the country. North and northwest Tassie, southwest Western Australia, the Green Triangle and northeast New South Wales. We've announced another 5 to follow on from that: Gippsland of Victoria, the southwest slopes of New South Wales, central west New South Wales and southeast Queensland. And I'm looking to announce, as soon as I possibly can, some additional nodes of our National Institute for Forest Products Innovation. And it's that R&D and that innovation that's going to be really important in the development of that. You heard yesterday with the report of the release of the EY report how important innovation is going to be in the rest of agriculture, and it's no different in forestry. As we see the development of the new uses, as we see the increase in demand, we're going to have additional capacity, and so we're going to have to maximise the use of the product that's coming from the timber available. And we're already seeing significant market pressure in the demand, for example, for saw logs here in Australia, where there's concerns about the strength of the global market drawing demand out of Australia, and the availability of a sufficient product for local sawmilling. So that's going to be very important. Obviously, we're going to have to work in relation to skills development and workforce, because if we're going to grow the industry, we'll need, particularly in those regional communities where that growth in demand for product and therefore skills and workforce is going to be required. I'll move to fisheries. Now, fisheries over the last decade and a half in this country is a sector that has really turned the corner. There's been significant challenges, but to the credit of the industry, some very hard decisions that have had to be made have been made, and it is seeing a significant and progressive recovery and improvement in our fish stocks. there are a lot of people out there who love to tell a disaster story about the oceans. Unfortunately, too often repeated. But Australia's story, although there is still some work to do, quite admittedly, is a good one. Today I'm releasing the 4th edition of the Fisheries Research and Development Fish Stocks Report. It continues the good news. Australia's fish stocks are well managed, and the majority of them are very healthy. 120 species, made up of 406 stocks, were assessed in the reports, and this includes species such as Australian herring, black bream, eastern sea garfish, elephantfish, john and miradori, mahi-mahi, periwinkle, redfish and sea cucumber. The reports cover the majority of the Australian caught fish that Australians eat, and of the stocks assessed, almost 85% were sustainable or recovering. This is good news. Yes, there's still work to be done, but we need to recognise the hard decisions that have been made, the pain in some circumstances that's been caused through the industry, that we have turned things around, and we are, quite frankly, a global example in fisheries management, and we're recognised for that globally as well. This is the 4th report, and it's now demonstrating trends of species going from sustainable from depleted, and that's important. And I think perhaps the greatest example of that, and it's one of the iconic species of Australian fishing, is southern bluefin tuna. Now, we all know that SBT was in a perilous state going back a couple of decades. We were down somewhere around 5% of original spawning biomass. The good news in this report is that that species goes from depleted to sustainable. Goes from red to yellow in the fish stocks report. And that is great news, and it's a huge credit to the industry. There's still a lot of work to do in that sector, and we should be, I think, cautious in the way that we move forward with the utilisation of that stock, and industry agree with us in that sense. But we are progressing well towards the target of the Commission for Conservation of Southern Bluefin Tuna, CCSBT, to guide the recovery of the biological stock to 20% of unfished biomass by 2035. It is a really good story. And there are a number of other good stories that go with that, particularly the development of the research that goes towards understanding the biomass of that stock. The genetic marker work, where samples from fish taken, and that's the terminology that's used is close kin. We can use the genetic markers within the stock to actually measure the size of the stock and the growth rates of the stock. It's world-leading work. It's being utilised in other species, and to read some of that research really does demonstrate what a great job that we're doing with our R&D and research in this country. And the scientific community, I say, deserve an enormous amount of credit for the work that they've done in using those global cutting-edge genetics to get a more accurate and a cost-effective method of assessing SBT stock. Because this is a fishery that is not just about Australia, it's not just about our industry in Port Lincoln. It's an internationally managed fishery where there are a number of stakeholders, and we hold a significant responsibility within that CCSBT framework, along with countries like New Zealand, Japan, and some of our close neighbours who are also see it as an important stock, particularly Japan. And it also is a fishery that we will have the significant challenge of managing as a shared fishery, particularly between the commercial sector and the recreational sector. In fact, in working out how we share that fishery, we've probably picked the hardest one to do first. It is going to be a significant test of maturity for the commercial sector, the recreational sector, and all of those others involved in managing that process, because the stakes are high, the value of the fishery is high, and the emotion is high, but really important. Off the back of the announcement of the fish stocks report, you will very soon see the shark report card. That's not far away, but as I am briefed by scientists who are preparing that, there is more good news to come in that space, which is good. It's always easier to get a good run with a shark story. And again, it's something that evokes a lot of emotion. But one of the things that has been important in the recovery of shark species has been changes in fisheries management and the way that we access our fisheries, the gear we use, so that our fisheries are softer on sharks, so there can be higher survivability rates, so that we can ensure that our marine ecosystem is well balanced. And I think that as those shark reports become available, you'll be very pleasantly surprised. In fact, if you want to get a good sense of how the close kin work can be utilised, I can only recommend to you reading the Great White Shark report that was released about this time last year. Very interesting read, gives a good work through on how the close kin process works, and an indication of where the great white shark stocks sit at the moment. And of course, that will continue to evolve as time moves on. And in my view, I think you'll see continued recovery, and that will create other issues for us as we learn to interact with the marine environment with more sharks in it. The thing that I'm concerned to see is that we continue to have and are recognised to have well-managed, sustainable fishery that engages effectively our commercial fisheries, our recreational fisheries, and particularly our Indigenous fishers. There is significant scope for us to continue to develop in the Indigenous space. FRDC, to their credit, have for a number of years had an Indigenous reference group that have been working. We're looking to see how we engage that, and we recently changed the Fisheries Act to incorporate recreational and Indigenous fishers as being recognised as people who share that broader fish stocks. And if we're going to manage our fish stocks properly, we need to make sure that we account for all mortality in how we measure the sustainability of our fisheries. Horticulture. Horticulture is, I think, one of the areas where this country has an enormous opportunity. We are already huge players, and we're seeing a growth in demand for our horticultural product here at home and into some of our trading markets. The work that we have done as a government over the last 6 years in the development of free trade agreements in particular, Japan, South Korea, China, TPP 11, this week Indonesia, will continue to drive that growth in demand. And what we are going to have to do is to work closely with industry. R&D is going to be absolutely vital in that space to see how we continue to grow that demand. And one of the things I think we need to do is to assist with the de-risking of the industry. We've seen that happen in other countries, and I think we can do it here. Horticulture makes a significant contribution already to the local market. Consumer demand for those local products continues to grow and be driven in some of those export markets where our quality and safe food product. We need to continue to talk about quality safe because that is our market advantage. Where our quality safe food product is trusted and is a clear advantage for us. We will, however, continue to be subject to competition and market pressure. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. I know that there's a lot of discussion about price in the market, but it's actually also what drives innovation. It's what drives the need to innovate. And that's an important part of our economy. It's an important part of our industry. And I think the fact that we have been a relatively open trading nation for a considerable period of time is now one of our strengths. It's what's driven our need and desire to innovate, and it will continue to do that. One of the things that I'm very keen to do and have been talking to my department about for a period of time now is how we continue to grow particularly protected horticulture in this country. I'll be conducting a roundtable with industry later this month with Horticulture Innovation Australia to look at that. And you only need to consider what happened in the Netherlands over the last 20 years where they doubled their production with half the resources. Now that was driven by need. I think we can learn from their example and we're already starting to see examples of how that's being considered in the Australian market with the release of the Going Dutch report late last year. Some great examples of how we might do that. And I look forward to working within industry to see that occur. We have a very, very positive future here in this country in agriculture. It will remain one of the key planks of the Australian economy. It will continue to grow. And as long as we provide agriculture with the tools to do that through our R&D, and I do note the EY report that was released yesterday, some challenges for some in the industry there, but I think it provides some very thought-provoking information for us to consider how we structure our R&D into the future. We need to be world-leading in that space. If we're going to continue to be one of the agricultural forces around the world, we need people taking up our R&D. We don't need to be a follower in that space. And I have to say I really look forward to working with industry to continue to do that. This is a great sector. Fantastic people. Huge opportunity. And my and the government's objective is to continue to provide opportunities for this sector to grow and prosper, not only in the Australian economy but in the global market, because that's going to be the thing that continues to drive the growth and opportunity in the industry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. Terrific to have you here and to hear about all of those sectors this morning. We've got time for just a few questions. If you'd like to ask a question of the Senator, could you please just come to one of the microphones in the aisles and say who you are and where you're from. And yes, thank you for turning up the house lights so that we can see people. Don't be shy, but Senator, one thing I wanted to ask you was about fisheries. It is a good news story with so many stocks. Things are improving. Southern bluefin tuna, a fantastic example of that in my home state. However, I heard last night that there is a record heat wave affecting the waters around Tasmania and other parts of the country at the moment. Now, that's something obviously we can't directly control. How much does that concern you in terms of climate change, and what might happen with our best efforts to manage fisheries?
Thanks, Lee. Really good question. And the east coast of Tassie in particular is actually a global hotspot in the context of water temperature change, and it is having quite a significant effect on the fisheries that are there, but also new species that are moving in. So there are species that are endemic in mainland Australia that are showing up. They're impacting on creating barrens, for example, where the kelp beds used to be. And they're also creating potential disease risks as well as the water temperature changes. I think that is what reinforces in my mind that we need to continue to invest strongly in our R&D. If you go and talk to the oyster growers in Tasmania, as I was last week, for example, they've had a pretty difficult time over recent years with a disease whose acronym is POMS. But the way that industry has recovered through R&D, through breeding of POMS-resistant stock, and the guys down there I was talking to the other day were in a pretty good mood, and they weren't in a very good mood a couple of years ago. So maintaining things like our biosecurity are going to be important. Our marine biosecurity is absolutely vital. But ensuring that we have the skills, the tools to be able to deal with those things as they migrate, and we have to also be flexible, I think, in the conversations that we're having around our fisheries management, because what we're also seeing is a lot of our fish stocks move south, and we're seeing species turn up in areas where they haven't been before. Obviously quite a few of them in Tassie, and there hasn't been fisheries management regimes in place to manage that. So we have to be nimble and flexible in that space, and I've had a number of conversations with state colleagues about renegotiating offshore constitutional settlement arrangements, which are the arrangements which help to manage who looks after what fish species in what part of the waters, so that we can ensure that our overall management of fisheries is maintained in a good way. We can continue to see the improvement in the fish stocks, because it's important that consumers, people more generally, have confidence in the way that we're managing our fisheries, and that if you want to buy a piece of fish or have a feed of fish, buying local fish, you can be very confident in its sustainability. Really important thing for our communities to understand.
And if I can just take you back to forestry quickly, you were talking about the need to get a lot more trees in the ground and significant hectareage of land around the country to do that. How will government encourage that? Because I think back to not so long ago, Senator, where there were tax incentives for blue gum plantations, which in some districts pushed farmers off the land because it artificially inflated prices, and it was really a tax dodge. It wasn't about necessarily planting trees and good forestry management. So having had that experience, how would government approach this challenge of that many extra trees?
Look, it's a very good question, and it's something we're quite sensitive to. The MIS arrangements are still in place, by the way. They haven't gone away. The tax levels have changed a little bit, and the important part is the prudential requirements around them have been significantly modified, which was, in my view, the real problem with MIS. But the MIS stuff's still there. Having said that, we're not looking to create a new MIS. And land use change can be challenging and difficult, and that's one of the things that we saw during the days of the early days of the MIS schemes. That's why I talked about working closely with the agricultural sector, because there is a significant opportunity to put trees back into the agricultural landscape, maintain productivity, that's an important point to make, but provide additional revenue streams for farmers through, for example, bundling landscape services. As I said quite genuinely before, putting trees back in the landscape can reduce evaporation rates, which can maintain agricultural productivity, particularly when your prime farm output is animal husbandry. But it also can give you a revenue stream from carbon storage, which is going to be important. I mean, Our billion trees will store something in the order of 18 million tonnes of CO2, and also providing timber resource. And the concentration on the hubs, areas which already have established timber industry, timber infrastructure that can process that. Logistics is an important part of the cost curve of any sector. It's no different in the timber industry. So concentrating on those areas around the country where the timber is an accepted and established part of the economy and building that strength, I think, is an important part of what we'll be doing as well.
Senator, thank you. We are out of time. We've got a fairly hectic schedule up until morning tea, so appreciate you coming here today to tell us all of those things. Could you please thank Senator Richard Colbeck? Thank you, Bill.